October 6, 1945. The war in Europe had just ended, but for a small mining village in North Wales, a new kind of darkness was about to fall.
We're in Coedpoeth, and life there, it ran on routine, on predictability.
Especially for a woman named Caroline Evans. She was a 39-year-old school teacher, very well respected in the community.
And this particular Saturday night, she was preparing for her weekly ritual, a walk she took every single week.
Through a place called Pant Tywyll, which the locals called the Dark Hollow.
That's right. She was going to see her mother, who lived in the next village over.
But that routine, the one she followed so reliably, it was about to become a death sentence.
At about 10 past 10 that night, Carolyn left her home. She set off down that familiar path, but she was walking into an ambush.
And it happened fast, barely 300 yards from her own front door.
The first warning sign came just minutes later, 10:20 p.m.
A man named William Thomas Davies, a local resident, he heard it, a woman's scream.
He said it was high and piercing, and it came directly from the Dark Hollow.
So he did what you'd hope someone would do. He grabbed a flashlight, and his dog actually bolted towards the noise.
But the dog came back, and when Davies scanned the path, he saw nothing.
Nothing at all, so he dismissed it.
Yeah, he thought, maybe a fox or just a walker startled in the dark. A devastating mistake, as it turns out.
Because that delay might have given a killer the time he needed to get away.
And then the timeline shifts. Just over an hour later, 11:40 p.m., a farmhand, Joseph Roberts, is walking that same path home.
He has a small torch, but the darkness is just overwhelming, and then his light catches something.
A man, kneeling in the grass, about 10 meters off the path.
And Roberts' description, this becomes the absolute linchpin of the whole investigation.
It was so clear. He saw a middle-aged man with a broad back, dressed in a full Royal Air Force uniform.
He even saw the stripes on his sleeve. 2 or 3, he thought. So a corporal, maybe a sergeant.
And this one, really odd detail. The man was wearing light-colored socks, white or gray.
But his face was turned away. He didn't even react to Roberts' light.
So Roberts, being polite, he just assumed he'd stumbled onto a couple having a private moment.
He muttered an apology and hurried past.
It's just tragic. He was likely walking just feet from a murderer and from Caroline's body.
The truth of it all came out at sunrise, 6:55 a.m. Sunday morning.
A coal miner, Maldwin Jones, was out getting his cows, and his path took him right past the cemetery.
And there, in a thicket of brambles, he found her. Caroline Evans. Murdered.
The response was, for the time and place, extraordinary. Within 24 hours, the local police knew this was beyond them. They called Scotland Yard.
And what followed was a massive mobilization. Over 600 statements were taken.
In a village of about 600 people, they essentially interviewed everyone.
They investigated hundreds of RAF servicemen all across the country, trying to find the man from the hollow.
But despite all of that, despite the full force of Scotland Yard,
he was gone. The man in the RAF uniform just vanished.
And for 80 years, that's where it stayed. The case files are sealed. They won't be opened until 2032.
Her funeral was attended by over 800 people, a whole community in mourning.
But there's been no arrests, no justice.
So how does that happen? How does a killer who was seen so clearly, so close to the crime scene, just disappear?
And who was he? This man in uniform, who should have been traceable in post-war Britain. Why did the manhunt fail so completely?
And maybe the most haunting question of all, what's in those files that has kept them locked away for nearly a century? What really happened in Pant Tywyll?
These are the shadows that have hung over this case for 80 years.
Welcome to Whispers of Crime podcast show.
Before we go any deeper into the investigation, it's really important to understand who Caroline Evans was.
Right. She wasn't just a name or a statistic. She was a central figure in Coedpoeth.
Absolutely essential context. At 39, she was the head teacher of the infant school in Verne. So she was looking after children from ages 4 to 7.
In a small village like that, especially right after the war, a head teacher is a figure of, real stability and respect.
Immense respect. The sources all describe her as warm, intelligent, dependable. So this crime wasn't just an attack on a person. It was an attack on the moral heart of the village.
And her personal life seemed just as stable. She was married to a man named Edward Evans, but everyone called him Dan.
Yeah, he was 40, a clerk at a local leather works. They lived at 20 Park Road, no children, but by all accounts, a very settled life.
A life built on these established patterns.
And the most important of those patterns, the most significant, involved her mother, Harriet Williams.
Her mother ran the City Arms pub in Monera, the next village.
And Caroline had this ritual. Every single Saturday evening, she would make that walk to the pub to stay the night with her mother. She'd return on Sunday.
So this walk through Pant Tywyll wasn't just a one-off thing.
Not at all. It was an ingrained part of her life. The investigative files confirmed that everyone knew she did it. It was as predictable as the sun setting.
Her husband, Dan, had he ever walked with her?
Only once, apparently, back in 1944 on a really foggy night. She usually insisted on walking alone. She must have felt completely safe in her own community.
And that dependability, that very routine, is what made her vulnerable.
It's the absolute tragedy of it. It weaponized her devotion to her mother against her. It meant a killer didn't have to be lucky, they just had to be patient. They knew exactly where she would be and when.
You can only imagine the grief for her husband and her mother, that constant, agonizing question of what if? What if she'd just done something different that one night?
It's a wound that never heals. And it fueled this incredible desperation for answers, for justice, that you see throughout the whole investigation.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of the crime itself. The timeline is incredibly tight here.
It is. She leaves her home, 20 Park Road, somewhere between 10:10 and 10:45 p.m.
Her husband, Dan, hears the back door close but thinks nothing of it. It's just Caroline starting her weekly walk.
And she was carrying her usual things. A brown leather attaché case, a small flashlight, and this very specific item, a 2-quart white enamel milk pot she was borrowing from her mother.
And she was wearing a distinctive red-feathered knitted hat. These are the items police are looking for later.
Exactly. And then, at 10:20 p.m., just 5 to 10 minutes after she leaves, the scream.
Heard by William Thomas Davies, that 10-minute window is the entire time frame for the initial attack.
Which is just chillingly fast. And the fact that it wasn't investigated immediately, that 9-hour gap before the body was found, that created huge problems for the police.
If they'd responded to that scream, they could have caught him.
They might have. Instead, they arrived to a cold scene.
And what did that scene tell them?
It told a story of incredible violence. When Maldwyn Jones found her, she was lying on her back on trampled brambles and old tin cans.
Her clothing was severely disturbed, wasn't it?
Yes, her dress was pushed up, her coat was askew, her underwear partially removed. It immediately pointed to a frenzied, likely sexual assault.
And critically, she wasn't killed where she was found.
No. The evidence shows she was dragged from the main path into that thicket. Police found a clear trail. Blood spots on the ground, a single blood-stained nettle leaf about 3.5 meters from the body.
So the attack started right on the path, almost as soon as she entered the isolated part of the hollow.
The proximity to her home is it's deeply unsettling. The attack was almost immediate.
Which really speaks to the killer's intent, doesn't it? This wasn't a random encounter in the middle of the woods. This was an ambush waiting for her.
It certainly looks that way. Now let's talk about the evidence they found versus what was missing.
The attaché case was a key piece. It could have held fingerprints.
Right. It was found discarded in some bushes. It had been opened and then shut again hastily, so hastily that bits of vegetation were caught in the clasp. A huge detail for forensics.
They also found her flashlight, the knitted hat, and a hair curler scattered nearby.
And they found one other item, a broken bottle near the body. They tagged it as possibly belonging to the perpetrator, maybe a weapon, but they could never prove it.
And the missing items are just as significant.
Her leather wallet was gone. And that distinctive white enamel milk pot with the black handle. Neither was ever seen again.
Which initially suggested robbery.
It did. But that theory gets complicated by one of the strangest details of the whole case, what the police called the clean shoes mystery.
Right. The path was known for being incredibly muddy.
Notoriously muddy, according to the police reports. Yet Caroline's shoes and stockings were almost perfectly clean. No mud on them at all.
How is that possible?
The only logical conclusion the investigators could draw was that she was attacked, incapacitated, and then carried or dragged the entire way from the path to the thicket. She never walked on her own through the mud after the assault began.
Which again points to how sudden and overwhelming the initial attack was.
It does. And it also implies the killer was either very careful or knew the terrain well enough to avoid the mud himself. Another clue pointing possibly to a local.
So the crime scene paints a picture of a brutal, swift attack. But the post-mortem, that's where the true horror of it was laid bare.
Yes. The examination was done by a Dr. Anthony Michael Thomas about 12 hours after she was found.
And the cause of death was strangulation.
Asphyxia by strangulation. But it wasn't a quick act. It was achieved with a combination of 2 methods.
What were they?
Manual strangulation, so with his hands, and also with the victim's own tie, which had been twisted incredibly tightly around her neck.
The level of force must have been immense.
It was, and the proof of that was the fracture to the hyoid bone. It's a small U-shaped bone in the neck.
And it doesn't break easily.
Not at all. It takes extreme direct pressure. It's a definitive sign of a violent, deliberate killing.
And there were other injuries, weren't there? The attack was a frenzy.
A complete frenzy. She'd been hit in the face at least twice. Savage blows that left deep purple bruising around her eyes and jaw. There was severe hemorrhaging in her neck muscles.
And they found fingernail marks.
Yes. Dr. Thomas documented them specifically. 6 distinct marks on the right side of her neck, 2 on the left. The killer's hands were literally imprinted on her.
It's just brutal.
Her face was covered in blood, bruises inside her lips. The report even noted debris in her hair, wood, nettles, leaves, proof of how she was dragged across the ground.
And the postmortem confirmed the motive.
It did. It confirmed she had been sexually assaulted after she was either unconscious or already dead.
So this wasn't about robbery. This was about savage, uncontrolled violence.
Absolutely. But the report also contained one major complication, a detail that threw the initial investigation into confusion.
What was that?
The estimated time of death. Dr. Thomas, using the science available to him in 1945, put the time of death at around 9:00 p.m.
9 o'clock, but that's impossible.
Exactly. If she died at 9, she was dead over an hour before she even left her house. It completely contradicted her husband's testimony and, more importantly, the 10:20 p.m. scream.
So how did the police handle that? Did they disregard the witnesses?
No, and this is to their credit. They understood the limitations of the science at the time. Estimating time of death back then was. It was an art as much as a science. It depended on things like body temperature and rigor mortis, which are hugely affected by the environment.
And her body was outside all night.
All night. Plus, you have to factor in that the clocks changed that night. The UK switched from British summertime back to Greenwich Mean Time at midnight. That just adds another layer of confusion.
So they made a choice.
They did. They prioritized the credible human evidence, the scream at 10:20, the sighting at 11:40 over the imprecise science. That timeline became the foundation of their entire investigation.
And that investigation ramped up incredibly quickly. The brutality of the crime, the fact that the victim was so well known, it demanded a huge response.
And the military connection, that was the real catalyst. The local chief constable, George Guest, he made the call to Scotland Yard within 24 hours.
And they sent their best. Chief Inspector Tom Philpott and Sergeant Jim Hislop.
The arrival of the Yard signaled just how serious this was. In post-war Britain, a crime like this, with a potential military suspect, was a threat to public order. It had to be solved.
And the scale of the operation they launched was just staggering.
It was. We mentioned the 600 statements taken in a village of 600 people. They also created these things called murder forms.
What were those?
Basically a detailed questionnaire. They gave one to every single household, asking for a minute-by-minute account of where everyone was between 10 and midnight on that Saturday.
A level of scrutiny that's hard to imagine today.
They were determined to find any inconsistency, any gap in an alibi. They also used the media, broadcasting appeals at local cinemas in both English and Welsh.
And the community was desperate for an answer. Caroline's mother, Harriet, she put up her own reward, didn't she?
She did. £50. Which in 1945 was an enormous amount of money. It was a sign of her absolute desperation.
And that desperation was matched by fear?
Pure terror. The village was devastated. Women were warned not to go out alone after dark. Local men actually started forming their own patrols to watch the streets. The sense of safety was just gone.
The funeral must have been a powerful moment for the community.
Over 800 people attended. And in the most tragic coincidence, it was held on what would have been Caroline and Dan's 4th wedding anniversary.
So for the investigators with all this pressure, their focus was laser sharp.
Absolutely. It was all about the man in the RAF uniform. Joseph Roberts' sighting was so clear, so specific, that became the theory of the case.
So they started a nationwide search.
Far beyond North Wales. They sent questionnaires to RAF bases all over Britain, trying to trace anyone who might have been in the area. The theory was he was on leave, or maybe he had been at the local drill hall dance that ended at 11.
And yet, even with all the power of Scotland Yard and the structure of the military, nothing.
He was a ghost. They never found him. And that failure, after such a massive effort, it really damaged trust. The investigation officially ended when the coroner's jury returned its verdict.
Willful murder by person or persons unknown.
That was January 1946. The case was officially cold, but the hunt for answers would continue for years.
And before we get into those leads, we just need to take a quick pause.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent released UK historical cold case like this.
So the initial massive investigation draws a blank. But the police don't just give up. The case file for Caroline Evans is filled with these leads they chased for years, 9 major ones in total.
And each one is a story of hope followed by failure. It really becomes a narrative of dead ends.
So let's start with the first and most obvious one. The RAF sighting itself. Why couldn't they find him?
Well, you have to understand the context. Late 1945 is the height of demobilization. You have millions of servicemen transitioning back to civilian life. It was chaotic. A man on a weekend pass, or in the process of being discharged. He could easily slip through the cracks.
So it wasn't a lack of effort?
Not at all. It was the sheer logistical nightmare of trying to track one man in a sea of thousands, all moving around the country. He could have been back on a base hundreds of miles away by Monday morning or out of the service entirely a week later.
Okay, so that's the main lead. What was the second?
Lead 2 was an anonymous phone call. A few days after the murder, a man calls the police and says he gave a hitchhiker a lift to Wrexham on the morning of October 7th.
The morning after the murder. Wrexham is a major town nearby.
Exactly, a potential escape route. The police thought the tip was credible, but the caller said he'd call back with more details and then never did.
He got spooked.
Probably. Yeah. Didn't want to get involved. And just like that, a crucial lead on a potential getaway went cold.
Lead number 3 sounds like something from a movie. The man on the train.
It's a very chilling account. 2 women reported a strange man on the midnight train leaving Wrexham. He was middle-aged, had a scar on his face, and he kept trying to talk to them about a dance he'd been to.
And then he says something memorable.
He says, "You don't know what I've been up to tonight," and then gets off at the next stop. The timing, the location, the threatening comment, it made him a person of huge interest.
But they never found him.
Never traced him. Another ghost.
The next 2 leads bring the focus back directly to the RAF.
Yes, lead 4 involved an RAF serviceman who was found with a roll of brand new sequential £1 notes. The theory was he'd stolen Caroline's salary from her wallet.
A strong lead.
It looks strong, but they investigated, and he was able to prove with military pay documents that he'd been issued the money legally. And then they found out Caroline's salary money wasn't new, it was already in circulation, so that lead just dissolved.
And lead 5 was about the muddy boots.
Right. Given the state of the path, they were looking for anyone with unexplained muddy boots. They found a serviceman who'd been absent from his camp that weekend and came back with his boots covered in mud and grass.
That sounds promising.
It did, until they located him, and he provided a rock-solid alibi for his whereabouts, miles away from Coedpoeth, and a perfectly reasonable explanation for the mud. Another dead end.
Then the investigation takes a turn into false confessions.
This happens in high-profile cases. Lead 6 was a shell-shocked ex-soldier. He was suffering from what we now call severe PTSD. He was having blackouts and genuinely feared he might have committed the murder without remembering it.
So he turned himself in.
He did, but the police handled it very sensitively. Their own psychiatric evaluation concluded he was unwell, not guilty. They referred him for medical care.
But then, years later, comes the most dramatic confession of all.
John Lionel Raymond Rustell. This was in 1950. Rustell was on trial for another murder, and after he was convicted, he stood up in court and declared he'd also killed Mrs. Evans down Coedpoeth.
And he even gave a motive. Sexual. It must have been a bombshell.
It was. It made headlines, but the police dismissed it almost immediately.
Why? A confession seems like a gift.
Because of the facts. In 1945, Rustell was only 13 or 14 years old. He simply could not have been the middle-aged man with a broad back that Joseph Roberts saw.
So just a fantasy.
A disturbed fantasy from a man who was later declared criminally insane. He died in Broadmoor a few years later. It was a tragic story, but it wasn't the answer to the Caroline Evans case.
And the leads keep coming. Even years later, there was a tip from Liverpool in 1951.
Yes, 6 years on. An overheard conversation in a boarding house was reported to police. It was considered so serious that Scotland Yard sent 2 detectives, including Jim Hislop from the original team, back to investigate.
Did they find anything?
They interviewed a witness for 3 hours, who supposedly cleared up an important point.
Yeah.
But the next day, they returned to London empty-handed. Whatever that point was, it wasn't the breakthrough they needed.
And finally, one last letter in 1952.
An anonymous letter pointing the finger at someone connected to the original statements. They followed it up, did more interviews, but it just fizzled out. By then, the trail was just too cold.
So, with all these leads exhausted, where did that leave the police? What were the final theories?
Well, it all boiled down to four main possibilities. The first, and the one Scotland Yard always favored, was Theory 1, the RAF serviceman.
Based entirely on Joseph Roberts' sighting.
Exactly. It was the most concrete piece of evidence they had. The uniform, the timing with the dance. It all fit. The problem was just the inability to trace him in the post-war chaos.
But the local police had a different idea, didn't they?
They did. Constable Griffiths, a local officer, was a big proponent of Theory 2, the local perpetrator.
Someone from Coedpoeth itself.
Or nearby. Griffiths argued it made more sense. A local would know her routine, would know the terrain of the dark hollow, which would explain the quick escape and, crucially, the clean shoes.
And it also raises the possibility of a conspiracy of silence.
It does, that maybe someone in that tight-knit community knew something or suspected something and kept quiet.
The third theory is based on the crime scene itself.
Theory 3, the sexual maniac. This is based on the sheer brutality of the attack. The post-mortem rape, the extreme violence. It suggests the primary motive wasn't robbery, it was rage and sexual psychopathy.
So it could have been a random encounter with a deeply disturbed individual.
Or a stalker who had become fixated on her.
And the last theory, robbery, that one seems the weakest.
It does. The wallet and milk pot were missing, yes. But her valuable gold watch was found at home, along with her salary. It seems unlikely a robber would commit such extreme violence and then overlook the most valuable items.
So you have this huge investigation, all these theories, and it just hits a wall. It feels like a massive institutional failure.
I think it's more a reflection of the limits of the time. You have to remember, this is 1945. There's no DNA, no forensic databases, no CCTV. They were working with fingerprints, footprints, and witness statements. They did everything they could with the tools they had.
And so the investigation was officially shut down in 1957, and the files were sealed.
Yes, under the standard 75-year rule for sensitive police files in the UK, which is why 2032 is such a significant date.
That's when everything is finally open to the public.
Everything. The original witness statements, the crime scene photos, the internal police memos. We do know there was a brief discussion about reopening the case in 2006 by the North Wales Police, but nothing seems to have come of it.
So for 80 years, this has remained one of Wales's most haunting cold cases, and the clock is still ticking.
It is, ticking towards that 2032 deadline, which represents the last, best chance for an answer.
And when you think about what that could mean, it's really about the evolution of science, isn't it?
Completely. The 1945 team had so little to work with. But if they collected and, crucially, retained physical evidence.
Like her clothing, or the material that was caught in the clasp of her attaché case.
Exactly. If any of that still exists in an archive somewhere, modern science could do incredible things. A single hair, a skin cell, a drop of blood. That's all it could take.
You're talking about forensic genealogy.
It's the most powerful tool we have for cold cases like this. If they can extract a DNA profile, they could potentially trace the killer's family tree and finally give him a name. The tragedy, of course, is that he's almost certainly dead by now. He lived and died a free man.
Caroline Evans was a teacher, a wife, a daughter, murdered on a walk she'd taken 100 times before. The case is a memorial to the limits of investigation in that era.
And the man in the RAF uniform remains the prime suspect. A phantom who walked out of the darkness and disappeared back into it, protected by the chaos of his time.
So 2032 isn't just a date, it's a final hope.
It's the hope that somewhere in those dusty files is the one piece of the puzzle that modern science can use to finally solve this murder and bring some measure of peace to her memory.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent released UK historical cold case like this.
As we finish, let's go back to one of those theories, the one the local police believed in. That the killer was one of their own, a local man. For 80 years, there have been whispers in that community, rumors of a secret being kept. So the final thought I want to leave you with is this. Is it possible that someone in Coedpoeth knew who knelt in the grass that night? And if they did, what was the price of that silence for them, for their community, and for the memory of Caroline Evans?